The sunlight glinted off the glass skyline outside my office window, and I smoothed the silk of my blouse, listening to the soft hum of the city beneath me. My phone buzzed insistently on the mahogany desk, and I knew without looking that it wasn't another client. It was them. My parents. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen as if hesitation could somehow protect me. "Hello," I said, my voice even, practiced calm. But inside, a storm churned. They wanted to talk about my house, the very place I had built from nothing brick by brick after they had kicked me out at 17. My twin, pregnant at 16, had taken my room, my life had been discarded like an old coat, and now they were suing me. I leaned back in my chair, the leather cool against my skin, and allowed myself a bitter smile. How ironic, I thought, that the same people who had sent me away now wanted a piece of what I had fought for. I glanced around my office, the abstract painting on the wall, the neat stacks of files, the small potted orchid thriving in the sunlight. This was my world, and no one had earned a right to it. I tapped a finger against the phone and took a deep breath. I had survived rejection, humiliation, and loneliness, and I had built something real, something permanent. Now, the past had caught up with me, but this time, I held all the cards. 17. The number still feels like a scar etched across my memory. I remember the day vividly. The morning sunlight spilling across my bedroom, the lavender-scented candle I had lit in a hopeful attempt to make my space cozy. My twin, Emma, was sitting on the edge of my bed, her round belly barely visible under her oversized sweatshirt. My parents stood behind her, eyes carefully averted from mine. "You need to understand, sweetie," my mother said, her voice smooth but cold. "Emma needs this room more than you do right now." I felt the words hit me like stones. My room, my sanctuary, was being taken from me, not for necessity, but because my parents had made a choice I couldn't control. My hands trembled, and I gripped the bedpost so tightly my knuckles turned white. The lump in my throat refused to dissolve, and tears I wouldn't let fall pooled in my eyes. "Mom, Dad, I live here too," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I've lived here my whole life. How can you just throw me out?" They didn't answer. Instead, my father cleared his throat and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a note in my grandmother's handwriting and a key to a tiny apartment across town. My grandmother, bless her soul, had insisted I have a safe place to land, a place of my own. The note read simply, "You are stronger than you know. Build your life where they cannot reach you." I stared at the key as if it were a lifeline. I wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse, but something in me stirred instead, a spark I hadn't realized was there. I packed my few belongings, each item a piece of my old life I refused to leave behind. I walked out the door, the sound of my parents' murmured approval to Emma echoing behind me, and felt both terrified and exhilarated. For the first time, I was truly alone, but I also felt free. Free to make mistakes, free to fight, free to become someone they couldn't control. That key in my hand wasn't just for an apartment. It was the first piece of my independence, a promise that my future wouldn't be dictated by the very people who had abandoned me. The little apartment my grandmother helped me get was far from glamorous, creaky floors, faded wallpaper, and a bathroom that had seen better decades. But it was mine. I remember setting down the box of my few belongings, brushing my fingers over the chipped edge of my old dresser, and realizing that for the first time, every decision in my life would be mine to make. I wasn't a child anymore, not really. I was 17, frightened, and fully responsible for myself. I found work at a small marketing firm downtown, typing campaigns late into the night and learning to pitch ideas I barely felt qualified to suggest. My mentor, a woman named Claudia, took one look at my nervous energy and said, "You're smart, resourceful, and hungry. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her confidence in me was intoxicating, and I clung to it like a lifeline during nights when doubt and exhaustion threatened to swallow me whole. The first few months were brutal. I remember sitting on my threadbare couch at 2 a.m, my laptop balanced on my knees, trying to make sense of spreadsheets and campaign analytics while the hum of the city outside reminded me I had nowhere else to be. I cried a lot in those early nights, tears of frustration, loneliness, and longing for the family I had lost. But I also celebrated small victories. Landing my first client, getting my first positive feedback, seeing my bank account slowly swell. Every step was a whisper to myself. You can do this. You deserve this. I became a ghost in my family's world. They had cast me out, and I let them forget me, posting only casual, innocuous updates online while secretly building an empire in plain sight. I took courses at night, learned advanced marketing strategies, and slowly gained a reputation in my field. My apartment became a studio, my workspace, a sanctuary filled with notebooks, sticky notes, and the soft glow of a desk lamp that burned well into the early hours. I invested, saved, and strategized. By the time I turned 21, I had purchased a modest townhouse, a place that I could call fully my own. The sense of accomplishment was almost dizzying. It was proof that independence, though born from pain, could be a quiet, unshakable triumph. I walked through the rooms, tracing my fingers along the polished counters, thinking about the key my grandmother had given me, the literal and metaphorical key to freedom. Through it all, I kept my life private. My parents never suspected the extent of my success. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had built something entirely separate from their world, something they could never claim, no matter how loudly they protested. And I was just getting started. The knock at my door came at precisely 3 p.m, sharp and deliberate. I knew before opening it who it would be. My parents. My stomach clenched for a moment, a flicker of the old fear surfacing, but I forced it down. I was no longer the scared 17-year-old shivering on a friend's couch. This was my home, my life, and my rules. "Hi," I said, opening the door with a calm smile. "Come in." They stepped inside hesitantly, eyes widening as they took in the space. My townhouse was airy and light, the living room decorated with contemporary art and warm tones. A large bookshelf lined one wall, filled with carefully curated books and mementos, photographs of travel, framed awards, and a small silver key in a shadow box that my grandmother had given me years ago. A faint scent of vanilla and fresh coffee lingered in the air. My mother's lips parted, but no words came. My father's gaze flicked between the polished hardwood floors and the sleek kitchen island, his mouth tightening. They clearly expected chaos, a struggling young woman, maybe a life of barely scraping by. I gestured for them to sit. "I imagine this is all a surprise," I said, letting a soft, almost teasing tone edge my words. They nodded mutely. "I suppose you were expecting someone else. Someone you could still control." My mother opened her mouth, hesitated, then shut it again. I took a deep breath and allowed the pause to stretch, letting them take in the full weight of my presence and my life. The expensive, understated art. The elegant, organized workspace in the corner. The home that they had never believed I could claim. "I own this house," I said, finally, letting my words drop into the room. "It's mine. I purchased it with my own money, my own work. Every brick, every fixture, earned. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm thriving." Shock froze them. My father's hand twitched, like he wanted to reach out, but didn't know whether to pull back or grasp at something familiar. My mother's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something heavier: recognition, guilt, disbelief. I didn't stop there. "I've been independent for years now," I continued. "I've built a career, created stability, and protected myself from the very people who once told me I didn't matter. You kicked me out at 17, left me to navigate a world I barely understood, and now you're suing me for a house that has never been yours. You underestimated me." Their faces flushed with shame. I could see the unspoken acknowledgement, the realization that the child they discarded had become more than they ever imagined. Emma, my twin, was still in their orbit, but I had stepped entirely outside it. I had become the version of myself they had tried to suppress, and she now stood before them fully grown, fully empowered, and unshakably secure. I leaned back in my chair, letting my voice soften, almost coaxing. "I can do this the hard way, legally or..." I can consider a solution that involves respect and acknowledgement. The choice is yours. For the first time in years, the power balance had shifted. And this time, it wasn't negotiable. I watched them shift uneasily in the living room chairs, their silence stretching like a taut wire. For years, I had imagined this moment, not as a chance for revenge, but as a chance to set boundaries, to demand the respect I had never received. I was no longer the frightened teenager who left home with a single key in her hand. I was the woman who had built everything on her own. I want to be clear, I began, keeping my voice calm but firm. If we're going to have any sort of relationship, things have to change. Permanently. I leaned forward slightly, letting my gaze settle on both of them. This isn't about punishment. It's about accountability. My mother's lips trembled. My father's jaw clenched. I continued. First, you need to acknowledge the past. You made choices that hurt me deeply. Choices you can't erase. I want an apology, sincere, without excuses, without deflection. Second, I want no further attempts to control my life or my assets. The house, the money, everything I've built belongs to me, and you will respect that. They exchanged glances, but I wasn't finished. Third, Emma deserves your support as a mother, not your entitlement. You've already made mistakes, but it's not too late to guide her toward independence rather than dependence. And finally, if we are to interact, it must be based on honesty, kindness, and boundaries. I won't allow manipulation or old patterns to creep back in. I paused, letting my words sink in. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. I could see the weight of realization pressing on them, the acknowledgement that I wasn't just capable of surviving without them, I had thrived, and now they had to meet me on my terms. Then, softening slightly, I added, I still care about you. I'm not heartless. But care without respect is meaningless. If you want to be in my life, it has to be on the terms of mutual understanding and growth. I'm willing to help, but only if you're willing to change. My father's shoulders slumped, the mask of pride cracking. My mother's eyes glistened, tears threatening but held back by long years of habit. I knew that the path to repair would be slow, uneven, maybe even painful, but it was possible now because the power balance had shifted. For the first time, I felt the full measure of my strength, tempered not by anger, but by clarity and purpose. This was my life, my home, my rules, and they would respect that. The house was more than a property. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the woman I had become. And now, finally, those who once dismissed me had no choice but to recognize it. I leaned back in my chair, fingers brushing the silver key my grandmother had given me so many years ago, feeling its cool weight. It had been my talisman then, and it remained my symbol now. A reminder that freedom and respect were never given, they were earned. Months passed after that day, and the shift in our relationships was subtle but real. My parents no longer barged in uninvited, no longer spoke as if their opinions outweighed mine. My mother began volunteering at a local nonprofit, something she had always spoken about but never pursued, and my father took a genuine interest in supporting Emma's education rather than controlling it. I watched them from a distance at first, cautious, measuring each small change. But I also watched myself, how I had grown, how every scar and setback had forged resilience and clarity. I realized that the anger I once carried had transformed into a quiet, steady strength. I had built a life that reflected who I was, not who they wanted me to be. And in that life, I could extend care without compromising my boundaries. One evening, I found myself holding the small silver key from my grandmother, tracing the smooth metal between my fingers. It had started as a symbol of survival when I was 17, a reminder that even when the world turned its back, someone believed in me. Now, it felt like a full-circle emblem of triumph, of independence, of self-respect. I placed it back in its shadow box, the soft click echoing in the quiet room, and smiled. Sitting in my office, overlooking the city skyline that had once seemed so intimidating, I felt a deep, grounding sense of peace. My life was fully my own, shaped by my decisions, my struggles, and my victories. I thought about Emma and the journey she still had ahead of her. I thought about my parents and the lessons they had finally begun to learn. And I thought about the young girl who had once been thrown out of her home, trembling and alone, and how far she had come. I had endured rejection, heartbreak, and betrayal, yet every challenge had led me here, to a place where strength and grace coexisted, where power was no longer about retaliation but about choice. And as I gazed out the window at the sprawling city below, I whispered to myself, softly but firmly, I am the keeper of my life, the architect of my destiny, and no one, not even the ones who abandoned me, can ever take that away. Bottom of form.